Hi, I'm Trent Bosch. I want to show you a few ways that I like to mount my piece on the lathe, especially a utility type bowl where I'm just trying to make them relatively quick. I think the screw center is a great way to mount those pieces on the lathe. I use the screws that come with the chucks that I have. I have a Vicmark chuck here, and this is the screw that comes with that particular chuck. It's got a little shoulder on the back side, which is really handy for just button up against the back of the jaws, making sure that screw doesn't pull forward. I also have a one-way screw. That one-way screw, it basically has a little groove in it that can take the jaws going in there, or you can use it the same way as that Vicmark one, where you use that other groove as kind of the stopper for it. So they can fit in the jaws several different ways. You also want to pay a lot of attention to the size of that screw. From when I'm working on a piece out of green wood that's fairly wet, I want the drill hole size that I use to be about the size of the shank of that screw without the threads involved. So just take a measurement on there, and that would be the drill I'd use. If it's a more dry material, I generally make it a little larger than that. And if it's a really soft, wet material, I might make it a little smaller than that shank of that piece. So that's just some considerations to think about when you're using a setup like this. One other thing, or well, several other things I want to just quickly talk about. When I put it in the chuck, again, like I said, I want to butt that surface up against the back of the jaw, so I'm going to tighten it down. I'm going to pull it forward and make sure it's as far forward in that chuck as it can possibly be. That just makes sure, again, that it's not going to loosen up and move around on us. I also don't want to drill my hole too shy of the depth that I want. I want it about the exact same depth as the screw, or just a little longer. These screws don't have a really good point on them, so they're not really going to self-feed in the material. Most of them will just butt up against the bottom of the drill hole and strip it out if your drill hole is not deep enough. So I always like to just take my drill, hold it up against my screw, kind of mark the area where it's going to be maybe 1/4 of an inch deeper or so than the actual screw itself. And then I like to just take some blue tape. Need more hands here. I'll grab the tape and I'll hold that drill up there again. And then I'll just make sure that it's at least that 1/4 of an inch deeper. And then I'll just wrap this tape on here. I generally make like a little flag out of my tape, so it's going to spin around there and let me know the depth that I want. I also like to use little templates to make sure I get my hole pretty close to the center of my piece, and that little template will allow me to go ahead and get that hole where it needs to be, more or less. So let's go ahead and do that real quick. I also pay a little bit of attention to the grain orientation when I'm doing this. It just depending on how I want it to lay out. If I want the sapwood around the outside, if something cool is going on in this piece. There's a little bit of spalting in this particular piece that I have here right now. And do I want that in my piece or do I not? You know, I could make it the bottom and it mostly would go away. I could make it the top and it might stay there. Where we're going to drill the hole is going to be the top of the bowl. So just take that into consideration. And for this one, I don't really know if it really matters all that much. I'm going to go ahead and choose this as my top side, and we'll just go ahead and drill that hole. When drilling that hole, I bring the bit in and out several times. Take it down to that depth that I've decided. And now I've got that hole in there, I can go ahead and mount it on the lathe. So let's get rid of this disc and the drill. And now we'll go ahead and just turn the lathe on at a really slow speed. I could lock my headstock and scroll the piece on by hand, or we could turn the lathe on at a very slow speed and then use the power of the lathe to feed this piece onto the wood. And as this is happening, I'm just kind of paying attention to where it's going. And as soon as the face of the jaw, the piece butts up against the face of the jaw, I just let go and let it do what it needs to do. And then I'm going to lock the headstock, and I'm going to give it an extra spin to make sure that it really locks down tight on that screw. I don't want to spin it with all my might. Again, I could strip those threads out, but I give it a pretty good amount of torque, and I really tighten it as much as I feel like is appropriate, so that it's really going to hold on there well. And with all that said, I will generally also, I pretty much always will go ahead and bring my tailstock back up and mount my tailstock in place. And then I'd be ready to go ahead and start roughing this bowl out. I think it's a really good way to quickly mount pieces on and off the lathe, especially for utility type pieces where you're not worried about the grain pattern and how that lays out in the actual piece. So give your screw centers a try. They come with just about every chuck that you have.